From Bowling Green State University and the Institute for the Study of Culture and Society, this is BG Ideas.
I'm going to show you this with a wonderful experiment.
You're listening to the Big Ideas podcast, a collaboration between the Institute for the Study of Culture and Society and the School of Media and Communication at Bowling Green State University. I'm Jolie Sheffer, professor of English and American Culture Studies and the director of ICS. As always, the opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of BGSU or its employees. Bowling Green State University and its campuses are situated in the Great Black Swamp and the Lower Great Lakes region. This land is the homeland of the Wyandot, Kickapoo, Miami, Potawatomi, Ottawa, and multiple other indigenous tribal nations present and past who were forcibly removed to and from the area. We recognize these historical and contemporary ties in our efforts toward decolonizing history, and we thank the indigenous individuals and communities who've been living and working on this land from time immemorial. This season of Big Ideas focuses on sustainability and sustainable practices. True sustainability is dependent on equally balanced responses to social, economic, and environmental needs. On this episode, we look at the way that art and children's literature can be leveraged to foster a lasting sense of environmental and social responsibility in young readers. I'm very pleased to be joined by Michaela Goade and Amanda Rzicznek. Michaela is an award-winning Tlingit illustrator and a recipient of the Caldecott Medal, the highest honor in children's literature illustration, for her work with Carol Lindstrom on the 2020 book, We Are Water Protectors. Michaela's first self-authored book, Berry Song, is slated for release later this year. Amanda is a full teaching professor of English at BGSU who has taught courses in university writing, graphic narratives, and literature for children and young adults. Thank you both so much for joining me today.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Yes, I second that. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm excited.
I'll start with you, Michaela. Your career as an illustrator has centered on Indigenous cultures and experiences. How did you become a children's book illustrator, and what led you to explore these particular topics through your art?
Yeah, that's a great question. I didn't set out to be an illustrator with kids' books or in any sort of full-time artist. Really, I've always been involved in the arts from a young age. In different classrooms and art camps and theater and music. Visual arts. I really liked to dabble in everything. And when it came down to college, I knew I wanted to go into some sort of arts-centric field, but I had no idea what that would be. I was actually denied entry into the arts college in my first university. And so that really encouraged me to transfer to a smaller liberal arts school in Colorado, Fort Lewis College, where I was able to take a variety of art classes and business classes and really just a sampling of lots of different fields. And I ended up specializing in graphic design because I wanted to be, marketable for a job after graduation. And I did love the sort of the merging of art and business and sort of the left and right brain thinking when it came to visual arts. And so I did get a job out of graduation as a graphic designer and then eventually art director at an advertising agency in Anchorage, Alaska. And I did enjoy the work, but at some point I just wasn't creatively fulfilled. And at a certain point I jumped into the full-time freelance life after I had, enough clients that I felt like I could at least make it for a little bit and made that leap. And fortunately at that time, our tribe, one of our tribal organizations in Southeast Juneau, Alaska, they put out a call for proposals for a new grant-funded literacy program called Baby Raven Reads, which was aimed at our tribal youth. I worked with them for 4 children's books, and it was such this cocoon of safety to, really create and to learn this new art form that I had zero experience with. So I was able to start developing those picture book art skills. And then one of those books, the first one I worked on, Shanyak Utlach, Salmon Boy, went on to win the 2018 Best Picture Book Award with the American Indian Library Association. I wasn't familiar with any of that or any of those institutions, but it was such a wonderful surprise. And then it was just what I needed to get the attention of an editor with Little Brown, which is one of the larger publishers. And they had been looking for quite a while for an Indigenous illustrator for one of their texts. Encounter by Brittany Luby. And Brittany Luby is an Anishinaabe, First Nations, what we could now call Canada. And yeah, so they paired me with her for that first book. And then through that, I was able to get a kids book agent and the rest is sort of history. Then the next book after that was Water Protectors. We Are Water Protectors. But yeah, I'm very, very grateful to be doing this work, very honored, and I love learning. So it's a great field to be in because every book is a whole new journey.
And Amanda, you've taught children's literature, you've taught graphic narrative workshops, pedagogic techniques rooted in mindfulness, and you're a creative writer yourself. Could you tell us a bit about how you got into thinking about the art and pedagogy of children's literature?
As a kid, I loved making books. It's just what I did. And so I thought to myself, this is what I want to do when I grow up. And everything I did in terms of all of the education I went through was about writing. Like, how can I improve my writing skills? And I ended up getting my MFA from West Virginia University, which was an awesome experience, and landed in academia, right? And in that, I really started like developing my knowledge of children's literature and how it is part of academia. Sometimes it seems as it's not, like it's just books for kids, but children's literature has a really rich history and also social commentary that's really important. So that has really informed my teaching of children's literature. And also, I'm a maker, so I approach teaching as a maker, right? The past few weeks, we have been studying We Are Water Protectors and my Literature for Young Children course, and just looking at the text and asking questions like, why do you think Michaela made this illustration this way? Why is the snake facing this way versus not the other way? So for me, I'm just really interested in thinking about like why writers and why artists are making the choices they make in the work that's public to all of us, and how can we learn from that? So whether that's an environmental issue, but also whether that could be just work as an artist. What can I learn about the way Michaela includes graphic design in her illustration for children's books? So it's kind of been the way that I've gotten into children's literature and how I teach it.
Michaela, a key characteristic of your style is the way it bursts with life and energy in portrayals of natural environments and characters. And you've previously talked about the importance of growing up in Alaska and your relationship or seeing the natural world as sort of magic. How do you think about the relationship between your visual style and the ideas of connecting more meaningfully with the natural world?
It's really at the heart of all of the work that I do, whether it's children's book work or personal pieces. All of that is really informed by this connection and this relationship, really is what it is, relationship with the natural world. And here in Alaska, particularly Southeast Alaska, this is really helpful for We Are Water Protectors. Water plays such a huge role in our lives here, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, and the ocean. We're people of the tides as Tlingit people, and the ocean, the waterways, the glaciers, the fjords, the rivers, everything, the mountains. It's all a very interconnected ecosystem that we are fortunate to live so closely with, and its impacts are so immediate. And so growing up with that, I didn't really know how much I think it affected me and in turn the work that I put out into the world today until getting into this kids' book work. And I think what really spurred a lot of it is that these beautiful texts that Indigenous authors are putting out, they cover such a wide range of topics and subjects. I've worked on baby books. I've worked on, my own berry picking book. I've worked on We Are Water Protectors, working on one right now by Joy Harjo, which is a poem. And they all have there's such drastically different stories, but at the heart of them are very similar foundations. And I think that can be said for Indigenous peoples everywhere. It's just this connection to the land, and land is central to identity. And so through those particular books that I've been so fortunate to work on, it's helped bring out this own language within me, I guess. And I didn't set out to do it a certain way. It just developed over time. And, the books are a place to connect to identity and explore what that means for me as a mixed Indigenous, young woman. And so I'm really learning as I go with each book.
Amanda, I'd love to hear you talk about how you think about kind of as a teacher and as a maker yourself, right, the relationship between the visuals, the text, and for you, that connection to mindfulness, and maybe especially for literature for young children. How do you think about and teach your students to think about the relationship among image, text, and that sense of mindfulness or presence?
It's a great question. At the beginning of every class I teach for literature for young children, we begin by reading aloud the book. And I know that might seem elementary in a college classroom, but my logic behind it is this is a moment for us all to come together. So being, shuttled between classes and work and all of the other obligations we have in life, to arrive in one place and be there to learn, we all have to be present. And sometimes we just need a bridge between the outside world to this moment inside the classroom. And so reading aloud the book is one way to accomplish that mindfulness. And then it also gives us all an opportunity to read it again. Because I think as adults, we read a picture book, it's one and done, right? Whereas with kids, they finish it, finish We Are Water Protectors. What's the next thing that's going to happen? Can we read that again? Like right now, right? So we don't really do that much as adults. And I think that is a disservice to the art because we're only experiencing it one time. And so reading it aloud again at the beginning of class, a lot of times we'll say, oh, I didn't even notice that the first time I read it, or I missed that, or I didn't read it aloud to myself. And now hearing you read aloud, I hear the music in the words, which is Carol's gift in We Are Water Protectors. So like having that experience at the beginning, that read aloud time is like part of our mindfulness. And then I think we can like bring it into that discussion of the book. So slowing down and looking closely at the magic of the illustrations and really spending time like looking at the color palette. How does that reflect the emotion, right? How does that convey the social issue? It helps us as college students like understand what it is we're looking at. And this is art. This isn't just a book for kids, right? This, as adults, we can appreciate what is happening and what's taking place in this book through the words and the images. And then the words and the images going together. I mean, this is just one of those books I just dearly love in terms of how it marries the words and the images. And so emotions can be highlighted through the illustrations that don't have to be said on the page. So we can get the complexity of grief or anger without those words being present on the page. And I think being able to have illustrations that heighten the story, that heighten the emotional parts of the story is so important. And so it's just thinking about that interplay, that marriage between the words and the text is really, really valuable in so many ways, but I think especially in picture books.
I have a question about process. Michaela, your illustrations have incredible attention to detail, and I'm thinking about the final pages of Water Protectors where you have a diverse intertribal group with very specific, attire that is culturally distinct and significant for different nations. Can you talk a bit about how you approach research for your work?
Mm-hmm. I think research is a very important part of the process, especially for the books that I've worked on and probably continue to work on. They are, these subject matters they're reflections of culture and communities, and I can't just on a whim go at it and do my, try my best. I have to really root it in as much research as I can. And so certainly for We Are Water Protectors, it was a different sort of book, and that it was reflecting this huge monumental contemporary historical event. And so it's living history is what it really felt like. And I needed to be able to honor that. And so fortunately for We Are Water Protectors, there was a wide array of resources available for research, for whether it's documentaries or interviews or photojournalism. There's a lot out there. So I was able to gather as much as I could before embarking on even embarking on sketches, which really helped root that manuscript and that story. And I do the same for every book. If it's something that's rooted in a Tlingit worldview, it's a little bit different. I might be researching more specific things, like for Berry Song, which comes out in July. I was really getting into the nitty gritty of vocabulary and where do these words come from, and then when I'm working on a different, like Seeing You Down from the Stars, it's a baby book, so I'm not necessarily getting into certain traditions in the same sort of way, but I do want to reflect as best as I can. Maybe the author, in that case it was Tasha Spillett-Sumner, the author's culture, the Cree. I do put a lot of emphasis on research, and asking questions and building that relationship with the author is really important to me, which isn't necessarily something you see as much in the industry. Normally they like to kind of keep the illustrator and author a bit separate. But I think for these sorts of projects, that communication and that collaboration is really important, especially given the historical context of misrepresentation and erasure. So I always want to make sure I'm doing as much homework as I can and asking the right questions, and just keeping that respect high on the priority list throughout the entire bookmaking process.
Well, to follow up on that, one of the questions I have is how your collaborations typically work, right? I'm sure this has worked a variety of different ways, but what is your preferred way of collaborating in terms of, does the text come to you already complete? How do you, engage in that process of working with the writer to create like a really seamless final work?
Yeah, that's a good question. Each book is a little bit unique, and it really depends on the individual illustrator and author. For We Are Water Protectors, that's sort of the traditional way, is that the publishing house, the editor there, will acquire an author's text, which will be most likely already finished or very close to being finished. And then it's their job to pair it with the right illustrator. So then they go out and they look for the right illustrator. Sometimes you have an author-illustrator team come at it together, but the more traditional way is, yes, first acquire the manuscript, then they seek out the illustrator. And that's what happened with We Are Water Protectors. And as soon as I read the book, I realized I needed to talk to Carol. I wanted to learn about her history, her connection to Standing Rock, and then we just kind of fell in love. We just really got along great. And she was able to point me in the right direction for resources and information and imagery. And it was great. And we didn't tell the editor that we were talking, because normally they don't like that. But it was great. And I think that's something that'll change. I've connected with most of the authors, especially if I'm rooting it in the culture of the author themselves and their story. Of course I need to talk to them. And so there's no one way to do it, but I love to have that connection with the author. And I think my author friends agree that some degree of that is really helpful to the alchemy of the book.
We're going to take a quick break. Thanks for listening to the Big Ideas podcast.
Question. Answer. Discussion.
If you are passionate about big ideas, consider sponsoring this program. To have your name or organization mentioned here, please contact us at ics@bgsu.edu.
Welcome back to the Big Ideas podcast. Today, I'm speaking with Michaela Goade and Amanda Rzicznek. One of the things that we've heard a lot about is about the diversity or lack thereof in the broader landscape of publishing, maybe especially or certainly including children's literature. we've had hashtags like We Need Diverse Books and movements towards greater representation, but we're now recently seeing lots of backlash as well, with books being banned, calls to avoid dealing with race and racism or LGBTQ characters and things like that. From your experience, what are some of the patterns you are seeing in the landscape of children's literature, either on the side of kind of supporting increased representation or some of that silencing? And Amanda, I'll ask you to start, because in teaching this class to future teachers, many of them, you've been thinking and talking with students about a lot of different issues in children's book and kind of the broad landscape. So what are some of the things you have seen and are talking with your students about?
I think the first thing I have seen, and I try to share with students, is that we have come a long way since 2013 in children's literature, that we do see diverse voices. We are seeing this push to be inclusive. That's happening in the writer and illustrator and publishing end. Then there's also the point about the banned books, right? So you have the industry saying, yes, we have these voices. We want to honor these voices. We want these voices to be heard. And then now in classrooms or in school districts or in libraries, we see that some books are being banned. And how do we bring the communities together? What do we need to do is a lot of the discussion that I have with future educators. What will that mean if they go to a school district where a book they want to teach is banned? What will they do in place of that? How will they navigate those waters? This is really tricky. It's just tricky, and I think it's something that they have to think about, their capacity for activism, like who they are and how they can be allies, the students who are in my classes, how they can be allies, how they want to be allies. And so I think what's really helpful is looking at the back matter in a lot of these books to understand these communities. And I think this is, in so many of these books, is informing adults reading them about these communities or about these social issues, so that maybe there is more understanding versus this wall up of, well, that's just not where I want to go, or I don't want my kids to know about this. That maybe there could be more like awareness, right? And just more understanding.
Yeah, Michaela, from your perspective as a creator and working with both a kind of community-based publishing and now with, a larger national publisher, how are you thinking about this climate and about kind of both the positive changes and the backlash and where there's still yet to go?
Yeah, it is like Amanda was saying, it is a tricky situation. And I feel for the teachers and educators and librarians who are stuck in the middle of it. In some ways, although I wish this weren't true, it's always a pendulum. When you see progress, it always will swing back the other way to some degree. And I wish, in an ideal world, that doesn't happen. But I'm still relatively new to the book world. I didn't really start in the major trade publishing world until 2018 or 2019. But even in that short time period, like when I first signed on with Encounter, the editor, who I continue to work with closely today, she's like, I've been looking for forever to find the right Indigenous illustrator. I just couldn't find one for picture books. And I think that they were there. I think it's just hard to find them, right? But now there are a lot more. It's not like there's a ton of books by Indigenous makers, but we're getting there. It's a growing canon, and there are now more Indigenous illustrators I can point folks to. I'm seeing more Indigenous illustrators on social media that I already follow who are now getting into books, right? Now they're breaking the news that they have book deals, and that's so exciting. And so we're going to see more tribally specific stories where we'll have a Tlingit author and a Tlingit illustrator, a Anishinaabe author and a Anishinaabe illustrator, and you're just going to get such nuance and complexity within those books when that happens. So that's great to see. But in that wider sense, of course, we are seeing that it is troubling and disheartening at times, right? And I've experienced a little bit of backlash, like with water. We are water protectors. That was that remains to be the book that I've worked on that has the strongest social commentary theme, the strongest social justice element. And so while I was working on it, I had an inkling that there might be some backlash to it. And certainly there was. But both Carol and I were blown away at how many people embraced it, and to the degree that it spread and it found audiences. We're still shocked that it was elevated in the way it was, and it reached as many people as it did. And I think that in itself is really encouraging, because just the messages at its core are so simple, yet so mind-boggling to some folks, and so threatening to others. And so I try to ignore a lot of that noise to a degree, and hope that in time the tide of progress will overtake the naysayers, right? And we just have to keep making these books and keep getting them to the hands of children and educators, and know that they are helping those who they are reaching. And just keep trying. And I know I'm just one of many bookmakers who are, working to that end, and it is a whole community effort.
As we sort of wrap up, I'd love to hear what advice you have for young people who are interested in exploring critical topics through the medium of children's literature or illustration or making generally, right? Especially as they think of communicating what matters to them, whether it's social issues like environmentalism or representation. How would you encourage them to move forward with finding their own voice and style, in this current moment? Amanda, would you go first?
I think the first thing is read. Just read. Read as many books as you can on as many topics as you can. And I think along the way in reading, we find our mentors. We find our mentor texts. And in doing so, becoming a maker, it's like that becomes like your ancestor, that text or that author in that way. Just become somebody that you can rely on, you can draw strength from, and maybe gain understanding. And I know Michaela already talked about this, but research, whether that's interviewing folks, talking to people in the community, whether that is just going to the library and looking at books, or going to an art museum and looking at the art. There's so many different ways to research, but gaining a closer understanding of what you want to write about and how you connect to what you want to write about. And then I also think too, it's just listening. Just a lot of, I know that goes back to reading, but just a lot of listening and understanding, appreciating, honoring. I just think those things are so important. And then I would say above all, just honor your own voice. Write the stories that are yours to tell, that belong to you, instead of looking outside and thinking, oh, I need to write a story about X because that's what everybody else is doing, or that's the trend. Or I think coming back to home to yourself and writing about stories that you've survived or that are important to you and sharing those with others. I think having your own voice is so important.
Yes, 100 times, 100% to all of that. I agree too. Find what lights you up and really lean into it. I shied away from, early conversations with my editor and agent, but do people really want to hear my unique little stories about my, small little place where I live and what people would say in the middle of nowhere, even though it's not. But, they're like, no, they really encouraged me to dig into that. And what can you find when you do that? Because guarantee there's a universal experience to be found there with all that. I also like to recommend to look for local opportunities. That's how I got my start, and I wouldn't be here, I think, or, today if I hadn't looked for and embraced those local opportunities first. It can be really daunting to look at the success stories of, publishing industry or whatever industry you're interested in. And you just sort of give up before you even really try, because you don't know where to begin. And so I love encouraging folks, look for the local stuff, hone your craft there, and really find, again, what lights you up. And for specific to children's books, I think a lot can be learned too when you do your own research into yourself. Remember what you were drawn to when you were a child, and then really investigate that and why. I think stories that honor that inner world of the child and aren't just like what Amanda was saying, well, I should write about this because that's what everyone's writing about. It seems like the trendy thing to write about. And I've tried that. And it's hard. And you'll write something that feels shallow and not deep. And I think people are pretty hungry for deep, meaningful connection to each other and to the world. And books can be a powerful way to help folks do that.
Thank you both so much for joining me today, Michaela and Amanda. This was a pleasure. Listeners can keep up with more ICS happenings by following us on Twitter and Instagram at ICSBGSU or by following our Facebook page. You can listen to Big Ideas wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Please subscribe and rate us on your preferred platform. For more information or to suggest a topic for a future episode, please visit us at bgsu.edu/BGIdeas. Our producers are Chris Cavera and Marco Mendoza, with sound engineering by DeAnna MacKeigan and Marco Mendoza. Research assistance was provided by Branson Young, with editing by Kari Hanlin.